that's when my jacket had moved up, and I had my firearm on my right side hip. My jacket moved up, and he saw it. I feel like he saw it. He looked at it, and he said, "You're gonna die tonight, motherfucker." And he reached for it, but he reached, like, I felt his arm going down to my side, and I grabbed it, and I just grabbed my firearm, and I shot him one time.
2 years have passed since Trayvon Martin, an unarmed black teenager, was killed by a neighborhood watch coordinator in a gated Florida community. The criminal trial of George Zimmerman and his subsequent acquittal riveted the nation. Even President Obama weighed in.
You know, when Trayvon Martin was first shot, I said that this could have been my son. Another way of saying that is Trayvon Martin could have been me 35 years ago. And when you think about why, in the African American community at least, there's a lot of pain around what happened here. I think it's important to recognize that the African American community is looking at this issue through a set of experiences and a history that doesn't go away.
Lisa Bloom is a trial attorney and a legal analyst on television. She covered this case exhaustively for NBC News and MSNBC. She writes about it in a new book. It is called Suspicion Nation, the inside story of the Trayvon Martin injustice and why we continue to repeat it. I am pleased to have her at this table for the first time. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's talk about Zimmerman first. Since the acquittal, what's happened to him?
Well, we've seen him pop up in the news a couple of times. Both his wife and then his girlfriend accused him of pointing guns at them when they asked him to leave. Both of them then recanted and dropped the charges. We've seen him go to the gun manufacturer for the gun that he used to kill Trayvon Martin, smile, pose for pictures like a celebrity. He also signed up to do a celebrity boxing match, but after some public outcry, that was canceled.
Why was he acquitted?
I think he was acquitted because the state of Florida failed to make his case. I don't blame the jury. I start the book, in fact, inside the jury room with a news story about what one of the jurors describes going through. I want to make it clear that I don't blame the jury. I blame the professionals, and particularly the prosecutors, for making such profound blunders in this case that I've never seen in any high-profile case, and I've been covering them for 15 or 20 years, every high-profile case
Charles
in America.
Ogletree of Harvard, a law professor that you may know, said, quote, the defense on this program, the defense did a good job in a sense of putting Trayvon Martin on trial, which he should not be on trial. He's the victim in this case, but in reality, that's what happened. He essentially says that the prosecution allowed the defense to put Trayvon Martin.
I agree with that, and I would take it a step further. Trayvon Martin was not only put on trial, he did not get a fair trial. He did not have an effective advocate in that courtroom. I don't think ultimately the prosecution believed in their case. I don't think they believed that Trayvon Martin was the victim, because they certainly didn't argue the evidence that they had. They didn't argue their smoking gun evidence.
There was some question as to whether they would prosecute the man, wasn't it?
February 26, 2012, until April 11th, 2012, they didn't even charge George Zimmerman. They didn't think that he was worthy of being arrested. And it was the public outcry, that groundswell of support that we all saw across the nation, many people participated in, that led to the arrest. But of course, an arrest is just the beginning. It's not the end. They still had to prove the case in the courtroom. And so the case was assigned to some prosecutors who I don't think believed in it.
Did they have a theory of the case?
No, they didn't have a theory of the case, and I've never seen a prosecutor win a case without a theory of the case. You have to give the jury a story. They simply will not do that job for you.
Because that's what the defense will do. They'll come up with a theory of the case as to why he's not guilty.
And the defense had a very coherent theory of the case, the one that George Zimmerman articulated from the very first moment when the police arrived and he had the smoking gun in hand, and he said it was self-defense. And at trial, the defense painted a very scary picture that Zimmerman was down, Trayvon Martin was atop him, was assaulting him, was reaching for the gun, was going to kill him, and so Zimmerman had to grab the gun and shoot in self-defense. It's a terrifying story, and if anybody believed that, of course, that would be self-defense. The problem is that the mechanics of the evidence didn't support that, and most importantly, George Zimmerman showed on a videotape that his gun was holstered behind him, and therefore it would not be physically possible for him to be lying on his back, especially on a dark night, with Trayvon Martin on top of him, knees to armpits, and to see that gun, unless Trayvon Martin had X-ray vision, that story was not possible.
So what's your theory of the case?
my theory of the case, putting together all of the evidence very carefully and having watched the trial several times and reviewed all of the evidence, is that Zimmerman took the gun out when he initially encountered Trayvon Martin, because we know he did not want him to get away. He was frustrated in the past. Other young African-American men that he'd called the police about had gotten away. He didn't want him to get away. We know from Rachel Gentel's testimony, she's the young woman that Trayvon Martin was talking to on the phone when the two men encountered each other, that Trayvon Martin's first words were, "Why are you following me?" followed by, "Get off, get off," which certainly sounds as though Zimmerman was the aggressor in the confrontation, and ironically, Trayvon Martin was the one standing his ground. I think Trayvon Martin got one good punch into Zimmerman, and that's reflected in the injuries on Zimmerman's face. He certainly didn't pound his head on the cement, like Zimmerman said. And he certainly didn't see the gun and reach for the gun, because that would not be physically possible the way that you put the evidence together.
Racial profiling has gotten lots of attention in this country. Has it changed?
Frankly, I was shocked when I did the research for this book to discover how widespread racial profiling is. It's not just Florida. Here in New York City, racial profiling has been a profound problem. As you probably know, a federal judge has said that 4 million African American and Hispanic young males in New York City were racially profiled, and it was unconstitutional. I think it happens all over the country, and I think one of the things I want to do in this book is say this is not just about demonizing George Zimmerman. It's about all of us looking at our own implicit racial biases. Most of us think that we're not racist, and yet when you take these very clever psychological tests, you may discover that you do have implicit racial biases, and there's no question that the outcomes for African Americans are still very, very bad in terms of income, education, housing, jobs. The only way to overcome that is to understand and acknowledge how these deep-seated racial biases continue to work. The good news is that law enforcement, police can be trained to stop engaging in racial profiling, and they much more effective outcomes when they do that. Doctors can be trained to stop, for example, spending twice as much time with white patients as with black patients. When we become conscious of what we're doing, we can change, because the good news is I think most of us want to be egalitarian in 2014.
There's finally this. You quote Henry David Thoreau in the epigram. You say, "We're always paid for our suspicion by finding what we suspect." What did you mean?
Well, and that's why I called the book Suspicion Nation, because ultimately I think we should all be concerned about how suspicious we all are of our neighbors. After all, crime is way down to 1960s levels. Why are we all so afraid? And in particular, why are we afraid of African American males? You know, a white person is much more likely to be the victim of a crime perpetrated by another white person than by a black male. But maybe we should turn down the dial on our fear of crime altogether. After all, homicide is not even one of the top 10 causes of death for Americans. If you want to fear our #1 killer, fear cheeseburgers. We have a lot more things to be concerned about than this obsession with crime and looking out at people and wondering who they are and pulling guns and calling the police. And I think that ultimately is one of the important issues I try to talk about in the book.
The book is called Suspicion Nation by Lisa Bloom, with a foreword by our friend Jeffrey Toobin. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.